Let's let the room fill up, guys. This is some really, really damning stuff. And if you guys had a chance to take a look at it today, I shared it much earlier. We're gonna have folks from Oversight Project in the house talking about this story and possibly a future story surrounding this information. So it's going to be very interesting moving forward. And I can tell you, just from looking at this and looking at some of the groups that were tapped by the Biden administration in this, it makes so much sense. I mean, we've been talking about these same people for going on almost 4 years now at this point, and some of these groups even longer. I mean, but yeah, it's absolutely crazy. So let me go to my profile and find it here. If you guys are wondering what the story I'm talking about, if you don't know, Up in the Nest was a bombshell report that came out today, and this is from Oversight Project at Heritage. And essentially, this is Biden administration weaponizing the government as usual with DOJ. And there was a 2021 meeting between Biden's DOJ and radical left wing groups from an executive order that Joe Biden released in 2021. And it's the same messaging, the get out the vote messaging, right? Except for this is a little different, and that's just the blanket term that they use. Um, but a lot of interesting things here. So if you go if you go look at it's the third tweet or post in the thread, it's got a list of all the groups. So AFL-CIO, obviously, I mean, hands are on everything. NAACP, you've got National Urban League, you've got, I mean, dude, a lot of Southern Poverty Law Center, obviously. Um, Fair Fight Action, which is an interesting group. I'll talk a little bit about them and things like that. So let's let the room fill up a little bit, and we'll dig into this. Colin from Oversight Project is going to join us in about 25 minutes to we're going to dig a little deeper than what the reporting is. So what I told him I was going to do was essentially kind of go through this information, get everybody kind of like a general understanding of the content and the topic, and then bring Colin in from Oversight and talk about this. So we're going to go through this. It's pretty damning stuff. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, we're going to talk about this because, well, number one, it is May. It's now May 2nd already. I thought it was still January. My apologies. Apparently, it's May. So we're going a little fast here. But also, too, I'll go ahead and open the floor. I know typically when I do spaces, I treat it almost like a podcast where I just have a couple of guests and things like that, especially when we're doing deep dives. But if you guys want to come up and comment about the content, you're more than welcome to. Pretty sure Millie and Jen will be here shortly. So, and we'll go ahead and get started here shortly. Just let the room fill up. If you guys could repost the space for me, get some more folks in here. I'm sure it's a lot more interesting than whatever retail politics conversations or culture war stuff is being talked about right now. But so, I mean, this is actually stuff that's tangible to make that we needed to be discussing moving into 2024 elections. So, buckle up on this and keep your eye on it. And we're going to talk about this. So, Oversight Projects has joined us. I don't know who's behind the account, but it's one of the few. Yeah, Mike, what's up, buddy?
Other boys will be joining in a little. How we
Good,
doing?
Mike. Good, Mike. Good to see you. I never know if it's you or Colin or somebody else behind the account. So good to have you, man.
We like to keep people on their toes.
Yeah, exactly right. All right. So what I'm going to do, Mike and Jack, I'm just gonna kind of briefly go through this. I'm not going to read the entire memo. I'm going to point out a few things. I don't want to put everybody to sleep when we're just starting the space. But there are a lot here that we kind of need to go a little bit deeper on. So I'm glad Mike's here. Like I said, I was talking to Colin. He'll be here in about 23 minutes or so, and kind of talk about Mike as well. What we were talking about was not only this reporting, but then what's coming out of this. Because this was, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, this took a serious amount of FOIA and fighting to get this information. So there's going to be a lot more coming from that. And so let me go through it real quick for you guys while we're here. Let's see. So this was a bombshell that came out today. Today we released our memo on the Biden administration's efforts to weaponize the federal government to get out the vote in 2024 election. We exposed a 2021 July meeting between Biden's DOJ and radical left-wing groups. This was an executive order that Biden had signed, Executive Order 14019, called Promoting Access to Voting. And it concludes that this executive order is a partisan voter mobilization effort by the Biden administration to mobilize historically Democratic groups to vote in federal elections. This conclusion is heavily informed by previously private Department of Justice records published for the first time in this memorandum. This executive order was signed on March 7th of 2021, mandates that federal agencies develop plans for getting out the vote, which, by the way, guys, getting out the vote is a catch-all term. Get used to it when you see it. This isn't like MTV get out the vote, right? This is something that's very specific, and Millie's here, perfect, because this is something that we talk about a lot. This is something that Millie and I had been investigating, and a lot of these groups we're investigating, we go specifically looking for the get out the vote language, looking for the poll worker sign up language. That's the stuff that we look for. So before I go any further, Millie, good to see you. I know you've been incredibly busy. We talked earlier, but I know you had a chance to take a look at this, but isn't this wild?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that the left put out massive get out the vote operations in 2020. They really focused all their energy on these ballot ops, and everything was around mail in ballots. They didn't, and that's really even what the Time magazine article was about. They specifically disregarded door knocking, traditional campaigning. Instead, they focused all of their efforts into funneling the leftist groups into becoming poll workers to essentially be the ones counting the ballots, counting the votes. All the while, they were doing these get out the vote activities. You know that Mark Zuckerberg injected millions of dollars into swing states, into these cities, in order to make sure that they were putting in these drop boxes and doing these vote in the park activities. And many of these things that they were doing were against our own election laws, but they justified it all in the name of COVID-19. So they really used the COVID-19 pandemic in order to kind of disregard election laws. And that came out in legislative hearings in state legislatures, where it was being essentially brought up that there was not a fair election because of the amount of just disregard for election laws that took place in many of these cities. But yeah, I mean, the left put out massive operations. It was all about these mail in ballots. And still, it wasn't just the 2020. They also, at least the groups that I have been monitoring, they were doing these same operations in the 2022 election. Specifically, I know of a huge hub that was doing stuff in Georgia for both 2020 and 2022. And they're gearing up for 2024 as well. So, these people are still doing what they do. And of course, the Biden administration is using its essentially its authority, its powers. I would say this is abuse of power. Would you say this is abuse of power, Aaron?
Oh, this is yeah. I mean, this has to be number one. I don't know how else you could describe it. You've got the Biden administration first step, right? Write an executive order, then go to your DOJ and to have them uh, cooperate and discuss with these get out the vote campaign groups. The worst offense of it, aside from that obvious abuse of power, is the fact that it wasn't balanced at all. These are all highly partisan left wing activist groups, right? So like this isn't some kind of pitch for election integrity, security, whatever. No, this is abusing the executive office of the presidency and the Department of Justice to basically legislate with a stroke of a pen to then authorize DOJ to work with hyperpartisan groups when we're all supposed to believe, other than the appointed people from from the president's cabinet, are supposed to be apolitical. Like this is highly, highly, highly problematic. So yeah, no, and Jim,
It's
but
like
yeah, go
they're
ahead.
it's like they're campaigning for the Democrat Party with government resources, essentially, because they're targeting Democrat areas, Democrat demographics, essentially, to do these get out the vote operations to turn out higher vote counts. You know, it would be, if it was fair, they would be targeting conservative and rural areas equally, and you would see that across the board. But because we know how the Democrats are, they're always going to try to go for these groups that they've, classified as their disadvantaged groups or disadvantaged populations or whatever they label it as. But what it ends up being is, you know, taxpayer dollars, government resources being put into essentially campaigning for the Democrat Party.
Yeah, and that's just it's crazy. Jim Bob, go ahead real quick, and I'm gonna get back to this memo because I want to get Mike's perspective on this because he's done a lot of the work here.
Okay, so America's favorite trash panda, man. I've been itching and waiting for about a week to hear your take on this. I've tagged you a couple of times, man, because I knew you were going to explode over this. Millie Weaver, you're an American hero as well. And trash, correct me if I'm wrong. This is a color revolution, man, and it's happening right in front of our face, and we have to call it what it is.
Well, I think that's a good point. And again, when you say that, people think you're being hyperbolic. And listen, Millie and I and many others have been laying the case for a few years now, and specifically over the last 2 years, we've been going at it pretty hard because of stuff that's come out in discovery, additional receipts we've been able to obtain. But I mean, all the people that are involved in the lawfare, right? The lawfare in this country. You've got Norm Eisen, who actually authored a Color Revolution book. You've got Michael McFaul, former ambassador to Russia, who is a Hoover Fellow, who also was basically overseeing Renee DiResta and Alex Stamos at the Stanford Internet Observatory, creating these censorship machines. Right now, keep in mind these are both practiced color revolutionaries. They wrote their books based on Gene Sharp's work. Maria Stephan. Listen, the protest that we saw the other day, this is Maria Stephan's hands all over it. We saw Lisa Fithian identified at Columbia. As soon as I saw that picture, I'm like, oh, there's Lisa. And so we can start calling it color revolution. It is not complete. And I have everybody listen here. I'm not being hyperbolic. It's not complete. Far from it. However, we have a job to do between now and the end of the year to address these things and through the election. But again, I don't want to go that route yet. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And you have an acting sitting president writing executive orders with a stroke of a pen, not going through Congress, and setting up these strategic plans to support implementation of the executive order and submit them to the White House by September 2021. Right? This is an executive order that is providing access to mail-in ballot registrations, having the federal government assist in completing those registrations, promoting access to non-English ballots, and importantly, quote, soliciting and facilitating approved nonpartisan third-party Like, let's one more time, just to be clear, one more time. Quote, soliciting and facilitating approved nonpartisan third-party organization and state officials to provide voter registration services on agency premises. The executive order ordered all federal agencies to develop strategic plans to support implementation of this executive order and submit them to the White House by September 2021. And then also, it had, and right here, as they say in the memo, it has activist origins, right? So they're saying here that we are going to use the federal government and all federal agencies are directed to develop a strategic plan to support implementation of this executive order, including mail-in ballot registrations, having a federal government assistant completing these registrations, promoting access to non-ballot. We saw just recently the NGOs and these people facilitating and down at the border that these people were essentially saying, they're saying, go to a government office, apply for benefits, we'll give you money, and by the way, we'll register you to vote there. This was just released. And so when you see this executive order in 2021, it starts to paint a clearer picture, I think. You have to kind of take this and go back to what this says and kind of like you have to reframe all the stuff that we've been talking about, that people have been exposing, that Heritage and Oversight Project has released just recently. That, I mean, the flyer, that blew up. That story blew up, and rightfully so. But think about the timing of all this. And remember Demos, right? On December 3rd of 2020, Demos, a far-left think tank with close ties to the Biden administration, published Executive Action to Advance Democracy, what the Biden-Harris administration and agencies can do to build a more inclusive democracy. This document provided a roadmap for the use of the executive power to, quote, ensure the integrity of our elections and strengthen opportunities for civic participation for all Americans, and particularly Black and Brown Americans. And then if you go in here, You've got the stakeholder listening session. There was a session July 12th of 2021. The people that were involved with Justin Levitt, Jesselyn McCurdy, and then it kind of goes through here what they were going on here, kind of what their focus is on, what their meeting minutes were, what you saw here, and so I probably will hold off on going over that until we have Mike and Colin go into this a little bit. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think you guys did a really good job setting the table. Let me add a little bit more history here. Everyone here remembers when Pelosi, was the speaker. What was their top bill? HR1. It was the federal takeover elections. I think they renamed it the John Lewis Act or whatever. But essentially, what it was a way to get FedGov an outsized role in standardizing elections. That was the argument. But to cement their most radical rules in all one place and have federal departments play a huge role. Obviously, they couldn't get that across the line. And so this is the recreation of that effort through the executive branch. The brainchild of this is, or the organizational brainchild is Demos, which you identified. Barack Obama is a founding board member there, I believe. Susan Rice was the quarterback of this out of the Domestic Policy Council. A lot of people wondered why Susan Rice went to domestic policy when, she was just a neocon warmonger the whole time, right? Why'd she go to domestic? It was to do this and set up this because this was their most important thing. And so that's kind of the origins of this EO. And what you're looking at now in this memo is the first steps they kind of take as the EO gets signed and how they're rolling it out with the partner groups. You're correct to identify like these, fraud terms like voter registration, mobilization, access to vote, all that BS. What this is combining the power of federal government and its point of sale connectivity to people. So think welfare agencies, think farm credit, think any place where government touches individuals. That is a huge political tool. Then you take those access points and data that the government has, and you combine it with a billions upon $1 billion dark money leftist operations. Okay. And then you have at the same time, on the other end of those operations, the explicitly political DNC and others, all trading the same data and all of that. And so you launch this and you do things like only launching it in areas where it's your preferred demographics and in states of interest. And so they haven't released yet, but this is what we're working on now, where they're actually doing this stuff. I think you're going to find that the urban areas in the swings is pretty much where the predominant bulk of this activity is occurring. They've already tipped their hand in their racial preferences in this. And I will note, as a comedic aside, they say they're focusing on capital B Black and lowercase b brown. And so that's kind of their preferred, AP style book, correct politically usage of the term. So they say that out loud. So they're not going to the, unregistered rural swing voters in Georgia. They aren't going to NASCAR races or the Daughters of the American Revolution events. No, they're going to the welfare agencies in the swings. And then it's not just that. It's not just like you said, the MTV everyone vote, let's all, have a cool democracy. It's helping people fill out the forms and things like that, taking active steps to do things that federal government is not allowed to do. It's not just advertising that we're having an election and advising people of their rights. It's literally like harvesting voter registrations and then turning that out and the data of those people into the get out the vote machine. This group Demos, when they were raising money to pitch this project, bragged that they alone could register at least 3 million people under this. 3 million people all being paid for by all of us. And you have to square that with all the efforts, whether it's Turning Point Action and others. Can you imagine if those groups had the ability to get 3 mil registered, all paid for? No. On the right, we're having to beg people for $5, $10 checks to go out and do that type of behavior. And so it's a complete mismatch backed by the federal government. Keep going down the list here. There's mention in this memo and the notes from it about illegal aliens. There's basically somebody representing, I think it's the Mexican American Legal Defense an Educational Fund, which is a communist front group and always has been, advocating that we need to trust that non-citizens are going to act within the bounds of the law. And that's become the talking point on, legal alien votings, that, hey, they aren't allowed to vote, so we just got to trust that they won't do it. And that's being said in the Department of Justice. That's absolutely insane to me when you have an invasion going on in this country and that many people that we're just going to play by the honor system. And so this memo is the first in a series of things we're going to be rolling out on this executive order. But the reason why we put this out first is because we think this indisputably paints this whole thing from its origin to its implementation as an extremely partisan tool that, frankly, is blatantly illegal. And we're hoping that some brave state AGs and others can sue to take this thing down, because this could decide the election. I mean, it's a numbers game, as all elections are, and you're just using the largest employer in the United States, combining it with the libs dark money operations. And it's we thought Zuckbucks was bad. Zuckbucks was subversive and a smart idea, but that was only in a few places. Did it swing the election? Yeah, on balance it did. This would have swung the last election many times over with a room for error. And that's what they're trying to do here. And so it's bad. Congress, this was between us chickens on this public Zoom call, Twitter space. When the House of Representatives turned over and Republicans took over, we were asked by House leadership if we could do one thing and one thing alone to defund and conduct oversight of and neuter, what would it be? And this was number one on our list to them. Obviously, they like everything else they do. A couple letters went out. Some people tweeted about it, but they funded this over and over again. And Congress has requested a lot of the documents that we have, and they don't get anything. But we're prying them out and getting a whole boatload, which we're going to be rolling out here over the coming weeks. So I'll stop there and turn it over.
No, and listen, this is incredibly important, guys. Can you guys hear me? Okay, I'm seeing it glitching. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, this is incredibly important. This is fantastic work. If you guys dig into this a little bit, you'll see like what this actually is, because a lot of things that Millie was covering with the Sunrise Zoom calls, and then the various different leftist groups that were doing various different poll worker operations and ballot harvesting operations, and the Molly Ball piece in Time magazine, the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election. Basically, they laid out exactly how they did it and changed all the different laws in the swing states. This wasn't done during that time. This was done with private funding, and of course the usual suspects like Arabella and Oma Diar and Soros Open Society. That was all private money. This is actually using the federal government offices and federal government point of contact to facilitate this. This is an industrial scale of what we saw in 2020. Like I don't think people get like how pernicious this is. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic, you guys know me. But really think about that for a minute. The way
What's
Yeah, go
interesting,
ahead, Millie.
I looked up to see and compare the Trump campaign's war chest versus Biden's war chest. And the initial thought process was that maybe Trump has more and Biden's trying to, balance out. Maybe they're struggling. But what I'm actually finding is it's interesting because Biden actually is exceeding Trump, according to reports, in monies that he's raised so far. So it does seem like that the Biden campaign is going to have a definite unfair advantage here, already having more campaign money at their disposal, but then also having these this executive order and the government essentially paying for some of these get out the vote activities in Democrat areas.
Yep. Yeah, and specifically the swing states. And I'm actually looking forward to the data that's going to be coming out of what Mike just talked about. Let me add this count back. Sorry, we're doing a little switch here. I'm gonna get Mike up here on his other account as well. So, and again, um, this is important to point out because like what you saw, right? What you saw, what you're seeing, what we've been working on with going after like the sunrise Zoom calls, and it's so funny to me, Millie. I don't want to derail this too much, but I think it's really interesting, Millie, that for the last almost 4 years now, well, 4 years, I guess. Um, you've been doing nothing but talking about this into a black hole, and now all of a sudden, everyone's interested in who Lisa Fithian is. All of a sudden, and I just, I find it interesting, and so keeping an eye on these groups, you have to really think about. Here we get Mike. So you really have to think about what this does. Again, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic, but this is industrializing what they did in 2020. Like to and also with less impediment because everyone's on board via this executive order. So let me get the oversight account back up here. Um,
No,
so
yeah, you're exactly right, Aaron. And yeah, it is kind of interesting, you know, now that we've seen Lisa Fithian out there outside of the universities instructing, she was caught on camera instructing students and protesters to chain a metal table to the doors to barricade the doors to the university, helping instruct them to take over the university buildings, which that's what I've been sounding the alarm about for the past couple years now, about how these leftist groups literally pre-planned to take over government buildings during the 2020 election months before January 6th. And there's been very little investigation into it. But I'm hoping now that everyone's eyes are on Lisa Fithian, maybe they'll start looking into that material and that information. But yeah, these leftist groups are also the election protectionists that were doing the get out the vote operations heavily in swing states, especially Georgia. They're very much connected to these groups because
yeah,
they all meet together on what are called spokes councils. You think that this is all separate. No, they're meeting together in what are called spokes councils, which I've documented, I have evidence of. Um, and so yes, the get out the vote operations are absolutely tied to these other groups. And in fact, they go hand in hand. The other thing about Georgia with the get out the vote, I noticed that I don't know who it was, it might have been Mike earlier, it was whoever was hosting the oversight project
hmm
account. He was talking about how they're targeting the essentially black voters. Well, what I was documenting, and I've been still following the election protectionist group.
yep,
I've spoken kind of behind the scenes to you about this, Aaron, where
yeah,
essentially I was able to gain access to some of their Excel spreadsheets for the state of Georgia for the 2020 and 2022 elections, and literally down to the precinct level numbers on ballots.
yep,
And they were directly targeting what they are calling the inactive black voters in Georgia. So that is exactly the demographic they were targeting, was inactive black voters, and they had the exact amount of ballots they needed for each precinct in order to get the result they needed.
yep. No, that's 100% correct, and I think that's why this post. I think people don't realize the importance of this post. So the second post in this group, the Maldef, which was Mike was just talking about, um, basically, the big B black and little B brown. But if you look at the groups, Millie, in the fourth post, excuse me, I'm so sorry. Look at the groups. We've got, I mean, we recognize a lot of these people. Demos, we've got Fair Fight Action, we've got Open Society Policy Center, we've got the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU. I mean, come on. We've got Anti Defamation, obviously, we got ADL, we've got ACLU, we've got SPLC. We've got all these people. We've got the End Citizens United, Let America Vote group. My God, just look at the names in these groups. Like if if there's people listening in this space that have been in this space of paying attention to who these groups are, beyond the obvious national groups that everybody knows. I mean, AFL-CIO, obviously. Um, but we start looking closer and you start drilling down, you realize that this is exactly what it is: the National Urban League, Native American Rights Fund, League of Women Voters. By the way, the Native American Rights Fund, I'm in Arizona. Let me tell you something. They're doing a lot of work on them out here. Um, Open Society Policy Foundation Center, Brennan's in there. People for the American Way, which is just it's just such a these names are just so perverted from what they do. Obviously, States United, Democracy Center, Asian and Pacific Islander, Arab American Institute, um, even the American Bar Association. But like, if you really look at this, you're like, what happened to all these groups? It seems like they're all captured. Well, they're all been tapped for this as well, and this is done through executive order out of the executive, the presidency, in coordination with the Department of Justice, and then deployed through every federal agency that, like as Mike pointed out, touches an American citizen. Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, one real practical thing that I don't think a lot of people don't work in DC realize too is this is a fundraising bonanza for the people who run these groups and draw big salaries. If I work at the Heritage Foundation, if I was able to go to a donor and say President Trump has tapped me with running his Get Out the Vote program using our group and then all of the federal government federal resources, I would have beach houses across, every single coast in this country and major city. This is a way to really enrich that kind of nonprofit class. They're making a lot of money and instituting basically a professionalization of these types of people, and it is really that's how the left operates. I mean, we get excited when a member of Congress like sends a letter about something we put out there. It's not like that on the left. They have linked the nonprofit infrastructure and the powers of the federal government, which leads me to my next point. Maybe when Trump gets back in there, that's exactly, if we can't knock this down, maybe we should do this. Maybe we should set up some nonprofits and turn the entire federal government into our directional get out the vote effort.
I have no beef with it. If this is the precedent that we're going to set, and we're going to operate in this gray area of bureaucracy versus legality. Maybe that's what we do. Because frankly, like, listen, this is how it's been done. Why? Because most people, especially on the right, what are their values? Their values are taking care of the family, raising a family, maybe starting a small business, being self sufficient within the family circle, and not really paying attention to the creep into our institutions, into our school system, into these various different groups. But this is what happened, and if this is the rules that we're going to play by now, it's not a bad idea, Mike. I'm just saying. I mean, like, I feel like if this is the game and this is the playbook that you're going to deploy, and you're going to completely pervert everything that it meant to be an American and extra constitutionally do all of these things, yeah, I think you're onto something. Jim, go ahead real quick. I'm gonna get back to this content here, and then we're gonna move forward.
All right, America's favorite trash panda. This ties into right.
Did we lose him? I can't hear anything. Did
Yeah,
we
I
lose?
don't hear him either.
Okay. All right. Well, while Jim gets caught back up here, I'll probably remove him from speaker, and then bring him back up if he wants to make his point. Sometimes these things get glitchy, so I know they're working on the tech. We're gonna get that done. But guys, again, real quick, if you guys could repost the space, let me reset the room here a little bit because my goodness, I can go on, and I know Millie can, definitely Mike can as well. We are talking about the Oversight Project have released. They've been doing investigations, and they have released documents on which they were going through FOIA fights, trying to go through Congress. And this was an Executive Order 14019 by the Biden administration in July of 2021 that was basically between Biden's Department of Justice and radical left wing groups. And this is a quote unquote get out the vote, right? Again, this is how they hide absolute, just ridiculous policy, tyranny, everything. They hide it behind special words like get out the vote. This is not the 1990s MTV get out the vote campaign. They're calling it get out the vote, but what they're really talking about is mail in ballot harvesting at point of contact from government, getting people onto their side at an industrial scale backed by the federal government, which seems to be unlimited funding, and then creating this just endless flow of money into all of these think tanks and nonprofits, and it's supposed to be nonpartisan, but it's all just left-wing radical groups. So this is a really, really explosive story here, and that's why we're covering it. So yeah, Jim, let's try round two. Oversight, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I want to throw some fuel onto the fire too for everyone listening here. And it's not just NGOs and nonprofits that are feasting in this space, it's also state governments themselves too. So, another thing we've been looking at is the Biden administration's coordination with state governments to sort of do the get out the vote area here. And one thing that we've learned and that we're digging into is a few weeks ago, the Small Business Administration, which is a pretty nondescript government agency here in DC, put out a press release saying that they've agreed, they come to a memorandum of understanding with the Michigan Secretary of State's office to do in-person voter registration drives and other get out the vote efforts throughout the state of Michigan. And of course, Michigan is one of the biggest swing states coming up in the election. So we're asking a bunch of questions as to where are these drives happening? What small businesses are you focusing on? Because we think that this is going to be predominantly in, areas like Detroit, and where other areas, where small businesses probably need the government's help, like, I don't know, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan or other rural parts of the state, will probably be ignored. So we're following up on the sort of coordination with state governments in implementation of this EO as well. The VA has also announced, the Veterans Administration has also announced similar partnerships with the state of Michigan to register voters. And so this is a pervasive government-wide, down to every single little government agency in the country, effort to mobilize left-wing voters.
Hey, Kyle, do you think the Small Business Administration is working with any gun or hunting shops to register voters?
Well, that's a good question. Probably not. We're going to find out. We've got FOIAs into SBA, but also into the state of Michigan, Secretary of State's office. Interestingly, Congress has also asked for these documents, and curiously, the Small Business Administration has not complied with their oversight requests. There's a stunning lack of.
Why would they when they keep
Yeah,
funding them?
that's a great point. I mean, we put in the tweet thread today too that the Biden administration has fought this in courtrooms literally across the country. Multiple groups have sued to get things like, the executive order calls for each agency to develop strategic plans for basically how they're federalize the election here. They've blocked efforts to. The Justice Department has strenuously fought efforts to get those strategic plans. A judge here in D.C., an Obama appointee judge, I believe it was Obama appointee, ruled that they're protected presidential privilege communications, meaning that they cannot see the light of day, basically, in the public. So if this is really a nationwide get out the vote effort for all Americans, it's really curious as to why the Biden administration is pulling out all of the stops legally to prevent the American people from seeing what they're actually doing here.
Well, and here's what's interesting about that too, Kyle. So if you look at the list of people that are on this, they're listed in this officially in an official capacity of receiving, directives and communications. And you look at people like, and listen, this is not the George Soros phobia hour. I have my beef with him, and we got plenty of things to talk about with Open Society. However, Open Society funds a lot of the groups that Millie was chasing down, that myself have been chasing down since 2020. And if this is essentially what this is doing, is it's basically mirroring all these radical grassroots groups. They don't have to be enlisted in any kind of official capacity here, because if you send funding and support through these main groups that can then provide support for all these other, like the ground troops, the shock troop groups, Sunrise Movement, Shut Down DC, BLM, Antifa, all these groups, they are being funded through these other groups in here. So this is actually basically offering these radical left-wing small groups that are funded under the framework of these larger groups that are listed here, to then basically bring them all under through the swing states and ensure that they're able to deploy all the things that Millie has been reporting on, that I've been reporting on. And I got to tell you, this is I think the also main point that a lot of people are maybe missing. Yeah, sure. I mean, ADL, it is a fundraising hurricane. But if you pin down these individual groups, and the reason I pointed out Brennan Center for Justice, because oh my gosh, because Brennan Center for Justice gets a lot of TVTP grants, and I'm telling you, this stuff here is going to basically highly empower these lesser, more obscure, unknown groups. Some of them responsible for what we're seeing on a lot of these college campuses, and this is actually basically putting this not just on an industrial scale, but like in an institutionalized scale. Like I don't think people understand the gravity of the story. I do, right? And I'm not meaning to talk down to anybody that does do it, but I think that that's going missed here. I don't know what you think about that, Millie.
No, I completely agree. And I also think that it's important to note that these groups that helped Joe Biden, I mean, many of them NGOs and these organizations, as soon as Joe Biden got in 2021, he immediately began putting essentially I guess you could say, repaying or benefiting those who helped him in these organizations by essentially putting them in his administration and positions. I've documented all of this, as well as giving them what they wanted. So, like their demands, they had the Sunrise Movement had a demand for creating an American Climate Corps. He did that via executive order. He positioned some of the Sunrise Movement leadership in his administration. Like he did this across the board. Many of the people even featured in the Feds for Democracy videos actually got positions high up or in his administration. The other thing, I would just say is I think that, just from what I know with these groups and their connections to Europe and Germany and essentially NATO, it definitely seemed like as soon as Joe Biden got in, he started immediately on this path of, shoveling billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine. And these, those essentially NATO and these allied groups, as well as USAID, they played a huge role in this. These groups were the ones doing the scenario exercises. They were, essentially plotting and planning to subvert Trump throughout the 2020 election. And they all got kickbacks after. So I can't help but see this through the lens of these are the very groups that helped aid Biden in 2020 with what happened. And now it's as though, of course, they're getting theirs, right? They're getting their pay. And, are they going to do it again in 2024? I absolutely believe they are, because they got away with it in 2020. Why wouldn't they do it again in 2024?
Yeah. No, that's absolutely correct. Yeah. Kimmy, go ahead, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper into this here. Go ahead.
Well, hello, everyone. I just wanted to say that I feel like I'm pretty informed person, but I just want to give a big shout out to Millie Weaver because there are so many things that I didn't know and that I shared. I saw you on the Pete Santilli show, and that was the first time I had ever heard of you. I had ever heard of the work. And so many things that you have uncovered, and that I think it's the sunshine something, but I'd never heard of it before. And so I would just say, please, everyone, keep getting the message out because we share it. I shared it. I shared it to like 3 different people, and nobody, and I think that we're all pretty informed people, had ever heard of it. So I just wanted to say thank you, and thank you for these spaces, and keep it up because we are sharing, and there are people who are waking up, and we
Well,
have
and
to hope
Kimmy,
it's not.
yeah, and Kimmy, no, I appreciate it. I'm sure Millie appreciates the kind words as well. And I'll let her respond. But keep in mind, like this work is being done by a lot of these people, and by Millie and by Heritage Oversight Project and Mike up here and Kyle. But this is the exact thing. We don't need to be arguing over whether what Joe Biden said at a press conference. That's irrelevant. That's not interesting. This is the infrastructure that's being put into place. And so people are going to be focusing on all kinds of wild theories and everything else. It's really just getting to the heart of the matter and naming the names, pointing out the information, and that's the stuff you need to share. I got a quick anecdote. My mother, I did not realize was so based, but I was talking to her about some of the stuff that we've been working on the last couple of years, and she's now joined X and is now following along. She's probably in here listening, to be honest with you. And there again too, she's connected with a lot of local parent groups, and so she's taking this information that is, in my opinion, very digestible. It's laid out. You have the receipts. There's not much there, and just take it to them, show them, and because the best way that this is going to be beaten is going to be beaten locally, and then also through challenges through Congress, funding, and what oversight and heritage are doing with it. So this is a multi-pronged effort, and everyone needs to be paying attention and be aware of it. So I appreciate it. But Millie, I don't know if you wanted to respond, and then I'll get to it.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for, your support in sharing this information and trying to help get it out there. That's what we really need. We need people to share this. And it's really important also that you guys share this bombshell information, this press release that Oversight Project just put out. I mean, this is a serious issue. I don't, imagine if Trump tried to do something like this during his presidency. It never would have been allowed to happen because the left, the Democrats would have in unison all been, you know, sounding the alarm and sharing this and talking about it. And they would say that this is something that he should be impeached over. I mean, they'd be hyperbolic about this because there's so many things wrong with what they're doing here. So, you guys sharing this type of stuff is what is key right now. So everybody in this room, I know, we've got a pretty decent amount of people in here. Please retweet, please share. We need to demand that this be stopped because that same apparatus that I infiltrated, these leftist groups, these NGOs, and what Aaron has been studying, what Oversight has been studying, these groups are the massive network of corruption. I mean, they're the massive network of groups that played a huge role in helping support what happened in 2020 and people like Lisa Fithian and others in these leftist groups and what's going on. So we can't allow our government and our tax-paying dollars to be going towards funding these organizations. It's only going to make it a bigger monster that we later have to deal with. And we all know how the Democrat loves to create monsters and feed monsters that then later come back to bite them in the butt. So this is not a monster we want to continue to feed. So please share this information.
Oh, absolutely. I will continue to do so. And I would also like to add, to that yes, the Democrats are monsters, but on the Republican side, I mean, it really truly is controlled opposition. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
They are not fighting for us. I
Well,
mean, I have a representative. He's retiring, but they vote against their constituents every single time,
yeah.
and I'm in a red state.
Well, and here's what I found. I got to be honest with you, Kimmy. Yes, there's a lot of people that are on Capitol Hill. They're funded by special interest lobby groups. Sure, we have all that. We have some people that are in defense contractor districts. Sure, I understand all of that. But also, what I found in talking with Congress about a lot of these issues and a lot of stuff that we've been talking about the last few years is there's so much information. A lot of them don't even know it or how to ingest it. There have been occasions where they've told us it's just too big. I can't take this on. However, what I have found is that they can be receptive with enough pressure done the right way with the right exposure. What I believe, I'm a huge, like, listen, this is not an oversight project sponsored space. I just grabbed onto them very quickly on the reporting they were doing because I thought it was important because there's a ton, there's a lot, and all of this stuff is not been done overnight. This stuff's been done for years and years and years. And I found a lot of staffers and Congress people just have no idea what this is. And so I think our dependence on Congress being the only ones to fix this versus being local and getting state representatives and getting candidates that understand these things, getting them to run in races and getting them into Congress, that's where it's at. And I think that ultimately that's the point of going over this and doing this exposure and trying to create a groundswell of this information that can't be ignored, Kimmy. I hear you. I agree with you. I'm just as frustrated as you. I'm not making excuses. However, I will say this is what it takes. We got to talk about it. So
Yeah, I want to just
let's
add as a
yeah,
I
go
get
ahead,
it,
Kyle.
and I agree 100%. Thank you so much, everyone.
yeah, I just want to add as a recovering congressional staffer myself here. Um, a lot of the members don't have the stomach to do the oversight work necessary to expose corruption. We are up against it as a movement here, and that the media doesn't do their job there in terms of holding the left accountable for we all lived through the Trump administration, right? So you need to be unimpeachable. You need to be dogged. You need to have staff that gets it. You need to have a member that is willing to take the arrows from the media, the left, the apparatuses that we're up against. And there's a select few members in Congress that have the stomach and the staff to do it, and the ones that do, are really up against it. And so, um, I share the speaker's concern about that Congress is not effective in doing it because they're at such a deficit institutionally in terms of the media and you know the left's control of every layer of society, but it's also just at a member and staff level they don't have the ability to do it either.
Can I
No,
add one
no,
more?
Kyle. Yeah, Kimmy. Kyle, that's a great point. And again, that's what I was trying to convey. Like, listen, I'm not making excuses for anybody. I have my grievances. I have my disappointments. But again, I can't remember in any kind of recent history where we actually, for once, were not being censored, banned, and astroturfed into oblivion, where we could actually have these conversations, do this exposure. You have to keep in mind, like the FOIA process right now is not just simply as like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to FOIA this document, so I just need to do that. Now, you need to have like a team of lawyers and 8, 9 months minimum of patience just to receive information back. Sometimes 2 or 3 years. You, the bureaucratic loopholes that you have to jump through to even get access to stuff like this is it's mind numbing. And so again, that's another reason why I support Project 2025, but that's a whole other topic. I've been talking about that for like the last year and a half. But the, what I've come to realize is a couple things. Number one, I think Kyle's spot on here. You're going to need Congress people that are going to have the stomach for it. Number two, know how to actually tap dance around the landmines that are our institutions, meaning that our media cap is captured, our legacy media is captured, our education system is captured, our judiciary is captured. I mean, if it weren't for the Fifth Circuit with Missouri v. Biden and a lot of these other cases, Hines v. Stamos and everything else, none of this stuff would even see the light of day. Like it's very captured. And so I'm not making excuses for them. I'm saying this is a whole new wave that has rarely been seen within public and within government. And that's why we have to be the ones to do this. And then trying to make it simple for people to understand so their eyes don't go cross and they check out when you try to give them the information. It has to be digestible.
Yeah, and I think
Can,
that's where you see the
may,
rise of
may I?
of
I'm
of
sorry.
alternative media, things like Twitter Spaces, Substack groups, what have you. People doing yeoman's work to do the on the ground reporting that the institutional and corporate media aren't. But you also see, the Twitter anons and the internet sleuths going through it as well. I think there's a recognition at the grassroots level that there are other ways to get information out there. It's just making that aware and sort of going from the bottom up to the levels of power.
May I also add
Well,
that, we also have, like a voter disenfranchisement kind of thing going on too. People are weary of the elections,
well,
the security of the elections. But I want to also really add that the Republican Party, where they really lack, for example, I live right outside of St. Louis City. I used to live in St. Louis City. And there, from what I understand, because it's a primarily Democratic area, I mean, look, the representative is Cory Bush. I mean, you
well,
can't get worse than that.
well, and
But the
Kimmy, yeah,
Republicans
Kimmy,
think they can't win,
Kimmy,
so they won't put in the money
yeah,
to run a
Kim.
campaign against those people.
Yeah, so Kimmy, this is the point, and I would like to get back to the topic, but and I appreciate you sharing your concerns. This is why we're highlighting this. So at the heart of this story, right, at the heart of this exposure, is the urban centers being targeted by these groups. Why are they doing that? Why would a Cory Bush be able to be elected into office? It's because they have well-oiled, fine-tuned machines, like we're highlighting here right now, that are putting these people into those spots. And so I'm going to move back to the story, Kimmy, and I appreciate you coming up and giving us your support. I can't thank you enough, and I'm glad that you found Millie's work because she's got a lot of good stuff that you can share with your friends. But I'll just say this: what we're demonstrating here is the skeleton. It is the framework. It is why your politics have looked that way in that area. It's not just that people aren't voting or they're disillusioned Democrats that don't understand what's going on. It is systems like this that have been fine tuned in areas like that that put people like that into office. That's why this is so important to talk about, because I think that I'm in Listen, let me be clear about something real quick. I'm in Maricopa County, Arizona. Okay, like, okay, we've got our problems. We've got a lot of problems here, and for so long we were so comfortable with the Republicans that were representing these districts out here that didn't really have the interests of Republican or conservative values, but it was just an R red scenario, and so to be able to break down exactly not only what they're planning, how they've institutionalized it, but then show you specifically the skeleton, how it actually works, is the most valuable tool. And hopefully, Kimmy, you and many of your friends that don't agree with those politics start taking over board of supervisors, start getting involved in your education boards, start getting involved at a local level and a state level, and you can change it. And by the way, might I just say, you have one of the greatest attorney generals in the country in Andrew Bailey in Missouri, and who is doing the Lord's work and the heavy lift of a lot of these things. And if you have some way, somehow, to get this kind of stuff and information to Andrew Bailey's office, I'm pretty sure he's willing to listen. I mean, I have my connections with him on the Missouri v. Biden stuff because I've done a lot of work on that. But, but again,
He's up against a big component because Will Scharf,
well,
President Trump's attorney, I believe, is running against him. So
Andrew's moving on.
I,
Andrew's going to be moving on. But yeah. So
so are you saying he's not running?
no. I just have a feeling he's going to be doing bigger and better things.
Okay.
Um,
All right. Yeah, I love him. He's great.
So, anyway, Kimmy, I appreciate you
Thank
coming
you.
up. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike. Welcome back. Let me get to the meat of the story here because there's some meeting minutes that we're coming up on here that I'm going to need a little help with, actually, Mike, if you could, or Kyle. So this was a meeting minutes from the sentencing project. Oh, real quick, let me reset the space. Sorry, guys. Kimmy, thank you so much for your kind words and comments. I really appreciate you. Guys, if you could repost the space, retweet it. We're still going through this content. I appreciate the time that Kyle and Mike from Oversight have given us here to go through this information. If you could repost the space, we're still getting into the meat of it. If you've missed the first half of this, this is recorded. It will be in my highlights tab on my profile. You can always access it along with all the other recordings that I do and Millie and I have done. And also, real quick plug. Go find the account at Sleuth Army. That is a new venture where we have an investigative team exposing and working on a lot of these stories. So go follow at Sleuth Army. But so Mike, this is the meeting minutes. It looks like from Keita Haynes, which is a sentencing project member. What's going on here on this Marshall Project report? What is all this?
So, really top area of focus for the CEO. In fact, the first thing that the libs complained Biden wasn't doing a good enough job on was getting prisoners and detainees in Marshall's custodies being the focus. So here's how you should think about it. Obviously, having felons and prisoners and all their types of criminals vote has long been a demographic of the left. But after COVID, things change, right? COVID, there was a huge institutional advantage for the left in that it is easier to ballot harvest and do all these things when you physically know exactly where people will be. Okay. They would be in their houses locked in because of quarantines and all that. So with no COVID and with like some of these key demographics having, poor histories of residents, whatnot, maybe, are from place to place, shelters, whatever. Where do you know people will be? They will, if they're an inmate, they'll be in their jail cell. And so that is why this predatory activity is so focused in the prisons. For that matter, it's also why college campuses and Native American reservations are such a high priority of this administration for this executive order. And so to put a little more color on that, the ACLU and others, what is the NAACP voter group, whatever that thing is, the Legal Defense Fund or whatever they call it, were really beating up on Biden and Co. and Garland for not doing enough to get prisoners registered to vote. And this is particularly evident with the U.S. Marshals. As you guys know, the Marshals go out and catch the fugitives and then hold them until their conviction. And so pre-trial, so they haven't been convicted of a felony. So they are a perfect ballot harvesting community. They're demographically overwhelmingly likely Democrats, and they're physically in a place where you know they will be until they're convicted, and some states won't allow them to vote in elections. And so that is a prime target area. And so that is basically what the Sentencing Project and others, although they wrap it in lofty rhetoric of rights to vote and whatnot, are all about. They're about making sure that rapists, murderers, thieves, crooks, you name it, pedophiles, are able to vote. And what this looks like in practice is everyone's seen the movie The Fugitive. Tommy Lee Jones running to catch someone yelling "You're under arrest" or whatever he yelled. Today, the U.S. Marshals aren't yelling "You're under arrest." They're yelling, "Are you registered to vote?" They did a massive muscle movement, one of the biggest in the history of the U.S. Marshals, where they redid 1,000 contracts for this executive order. Those 1,000 contracts were redone. So every kind of contractor and service provider for the Marshals was doing this get out the vote targeted work. We uncovered, and we put this out about a month or so ago, basically the stickers, the signage, the swag that they're throwing up in the facilities, and Spanish and everything, reminding detainees at every stage of the incarceration process, their words, not mine, of their rights to vote. And so think of it this way: you're a fugitive that's been caught. You're in the holding facility, waiting for however long for your trial is. That could be years and years. You have basically leftist activists with access to the prisons showing up nonstop every day to your cell, making sure you're filling out the ballot or the registration form, and not only making sure you're filling it out, basically filling it out for you, and then all you have to do is sign. And of course, they play off the prison economies, such as they are a lot of gang violence and tribal warfare, racial and ethnic warfare. Very, very dirty, crazy places. And that's the stream in which your taxpayer dollars are being used to predatorily turn out key demographics. It is, I think, predatory is really the right word. They're preying on people literally who are locked up for heinous crimes, and that's their top priority right now, because those are votes you can get because you know where they will be. And so that's what the Sentencing Project and others are about at the end of the day. Obviously, they paint it in racial terms. They believe in mass incarceration when we actually have a severe under incarceration problem. They essentially want to decriminalize black and inner city crime, which is much of the goals of the Black Lives Matter movement. And not only that, they want to make sure that even if somebody ends up going to jail, and they never want anyone to go to jail, they're certainly voting as often as possible while they're in there for Biden and others.
Well, and Mike, what I find fantastic about this is that a lot of this information that you guys have uncovered through FOIA and this report from the executive order in 2021, how spectacularly is it failing given all the lawfare against Trump in the country right now and the mood of these same groups that you're mentioning? Because these same groups are actually seeing and felt like they were persecuted and that the justice system was not working for them in those communities. And now they're breaking for Trump because they're seeing this exact thing happen. And I find it interesting because this is why it is so problematic for what Biden is doing, because they had all these plans. You mentioned Kyle, I believe Kyle mentioned this earlier, Susan Rice, where she exited the Biden administration, I think a year ago at this point, but she was there to do a job. She did her job, and now she's out. But all this plan is being foiled by Joe Biden because and Norm Eisen and crew and all this lawfare that's going on, and Letitia James and Alvin Bragg and Fonnie Willis and all these people, that it seems to be undoing a lot of that progress, Mike. I'm not suggesting that we sit back. We need to expose this and attack it. I'm just simply suggesting it's funny and ironic in 2024 watching it, what their plans were versus how now it seems to be having a problem.
I would
Yeah,
also
I
just
think. Go ahead, Kyle.
point directly at the migrant crisis too, in that services that are traditionally used by underprivileged communities, particularly African American communities in these big cities, are now being used on illegal aliens. And Mike and another staffer of ours went to Chicago last year and spoke with members of the African American community there, and they were furious. I don't know, Mike, if you want add a little bit about your trip there.
Yeah, I mean, Chicago, who's also the host of the DNC, and just a few months here, has been really ground zero for the not only the migrant crisis, but what people don't understand is the corrupt implementation of it. There's a lot of sole source contractors who did a lot of work in COVID. So people with no business experience who were connected to the mayor or alderman in Chicago landed huge millions and millions of dollars contracts to do the stuff you remember from COVID. Set up the tents, swat people, harass people to get vaxxed. When they're walking into public transit, all those people with the clipboards and the ugly T-shirts, they were downstream of basically some prime contractors who were landing sole source massive deals. What we saw when we were in Chicago is being well aware of the. I think at that point in time, they had just spent $30 million on handling the migrant crisis. It all went out to sole source contractors. Yet we're walking around there and everyone's sleeping on the streets in these illegals. And so you're thinking, like, what the hell? Like, this doesn't look like $30 million worth of housing. You literally have people wandering around sleeping on the streets. That's because there's a ton of corruption in that community. But bringing it back to what we're actually talking about, the locals there. I mean, especially in the older African American community, they're pissed. There's no other way to put it. They've been politically displaced. And I think a lot of them are catching on to the fact that the Democratic Party has viewed them as a reliable voting base and just hasn't delivered. Before we get too excited about that, like all politics, it's a numbers game. The Democrats have calculated that even if Trump can turn it to the traditional 10% of the African American vote going to Republicans to 13, 15, that's a small dent in the overall number, because you're adding in 10 million illegal aliens while you're simultaneously reducing any barriers for them to actually be able to vote. Of course, it remains illegal, but practically speaking, it's an honor system. And so you're seeing the political displacement of them, not only in their standing in the Democratic Party, but the flow of financial resources. I mean, there's black schools that were shut down so illegals could be put up in there, and their kids taking over the schools. But that's basically the in a nutshell what's happening with the Democratic Party right now. It's a clown car of a coalition of different groups, all that they've held together through some common narrative of we're all the oppressors fighting the bad guy. But now you look at what's happening on college campuses. You have like two clowns in the clown car, the liberal professor class and university class, having Hamas burn their places down. And so it's up to these groups ultimately to decide, if you're a Jewish American, do you want to be in the same political constituency as somebody who wants to genocide your people? If you're an African American Democrat, do you want to be in the same constituency as someone who promotes an invasion to displace you as what's essentially been the preferred minority of the Democratic Party? And these are all of these things that are happening. If you're a parent who's struggling to get by, do you want to be in the same political constituency as someone who wants to transgender your child? And so the walls are kind of closing in on them, but that's why they're so focused on the macro overall number and these registration numbers, because they think they can just force it by sheer volume. And so I don't get too excited about these kind of micro trends of, yeah, we're turning off some parts of groups, because I honestly think that the big data and the power of government, all these things with this executive order can outweigh what honest politics cannot compete with.
No, Mike, listen, I agree 100%. And Jen, thanks for joining us. And I want to get Millie's take on this stuff as well. But I would like to point out very clearly something that I pointed out earlier, that I am actually very, very concerned about. Like, listen, I have my fun with it. I get my laughs out of the optics now versus what they thought that they were going to implement in 2021 when you look at this information. Let me have that fun. Let me have my fun looking at the videos of many of the black Chicagoans saying DNC better not come here for their convention because they ain't going to like it too much. I can have my fun with that. But you're right. It's the numbers, and this is something that I was talking about earlier in the space when we were going through the data. Was they've institutionalized this through the federal government. All points of contact through members of government with the American public they're weighing on it, and they were able to do it through a stroke of a pen from the Biden administration, where it was happening through private funding and other governmental non NGOs in 2020. This is now institutionalized, and one of the things here that if you guys look in that thread, it's up in the nest down in the chat. They're talking about food distribution sites could be helpful as service sites for children and families like Head Start and Bureau of Indian Education. I brought up the Indian Affairs earlier because I'm in Arizona, Maricopa, and I've noticed a shift and a trend of how I'm even talked to by natives. So we have a pretty sizable native population here in Maricopa County, the Pima, and we all the way up to Flagstaff. And but in Maricopa, we do have a pretty solid native population. And just even some of them that work at stores, they talk to me differently. There's been a mass radicalization of Native Americans in the United States as part of this hodgepodge coalition that Mike's talking about. And a lot of those people rely heavily on benefits and federal subsidies, because you guys know how reservations work and how those populations work. It's very different. And this focus on this, Mike, if you could, let me get Millie's take if she has anything to add before I move on. But I really want to talk about this Native American thing, because this touches basically federal government touches all aspects of a native life, and what benefits they receive and how they're paid, all these things. This is a massive, and I know you included this for a reason. I'd like to hear why that reason is. It seems to be that I understand it, but I'd like to hear more of the reasoning. But Millie, did you have anything you wanted to add before I move on and go to this next slide here?
Yeah. Well, I was looking at the list. I think it's the third one down in the thread, the list of organizations. And I saw that all voting is local is in that. And obviously, there's a lot of very interesting ones. But that one is actually one that I have been looking into a lot, because that's one of the main ones that they were funneling people in the leftist groups and the combined action, the spokes council action that they were all kind of working on the groups that I infiltrated. That's one of the groups that they were heavily funneling people into. And it was funneling people to go to the poll worker staffing organizations so that they could then be funneled into those positions in order to receive instruction and guide onto how to engage inside once they were counting the votes. And if you look into all voting is local, one thing I noticed was, okay, one, they're targeting the swing states heavily. Okay. But two, if you look at a lot of at least it was on their website. I've not seen their website probably in a week or two, but last time I checked, they had their I guess you could call them managers or their staff that were targeting each different state. They actually had many of these were leftists if you read their bios, because they had bios, and like ACLU was in their bios, and they had very left leaning. So I'm noticing, okay, so it's targeting swing states. These are a bunch of leftists who are running each different state, and this is a poll worker staffing org that essentially is filling out the applications, completing the application and registration process to make people election workers. And they were funneling the people in the leftist groups and in the unions like the AFL-CIO into these poll worker staffing orgs to do these get out the vote operations and make sure they were the ones counting the ballots. So I find it interesting that many of these organizations in this list, it's like a who's who of who I've literally been investigating for 2020, and they're very, very suspicious election ballot operations.
Yeah, spot on. Exactly right. Um, and that's crazy, because I didn't even know you. I know what you've been working on as you and I talk, but I didn't know that you were actually looking at all voting as local. That's interesting. Really interesting, actually. Mike will be back in a second. Spaces are still glitching. We're still on old school Periscope technology. As the technology builds out, we'll be able to make this more robust. We'll have screen share. We'll be able to do all of this. I know that's coming. But yeah, no, like all voting is local. I didn't even know that. So when I'm gonna put a pause on where I wanted to move to on this native portion of this until Mike comes back, and I want to get kind of Mike's take on this. But Jen, you joined us. Have you had a chance to go over this yet? Like, this stuff is crazy.
I briefly went over it, but I am here to learn more. I mean, like,
It's
this
nuts.
is, yeah, yeah, this is the shadow government stuff that they've been talking about since 2017, this network of NGOs and different organizations, and each plays a role. I just find it mind blowing, right? That the left is able to circle the wagons, keep everything in house, keep everything under wraps, right? And the Republicans can't do that long enough in order to win, but the Democrats can. And I think like that is becoming a huge problem, is the infighting is really going to be our downfall.
No, it will. And that's the thing. I don't know if we're going to get into the speaker stuff. I'm glad Marjorie Taylor Greene decided to stop doing that. We don't need that. We have a slim majority. We do not need to be ousting Mike Johnson because, as Millie will attest, the number one goal of the left and a lot of these groups is to get Mike Johnson out of speakership for the 2024 election. That is the point. And so I think many people are missing the forest for the trees. So I'm glad to see that she has put that down. Listen, again, let me be clear. I have my gripes. I could sit here and go on for hours about the funding bill with not funding our border down below. I'm pissed. I know. I know you're pissed. But the last thing I want to do is hand Hakeem Jeffries the gavel going into the 2024 election, and you not thinking for a second if it goes down to a 269 electoral vote count of what that looks like. Yeah, sorry. So again, it, I'm glad to see that cooler heads are prevailing right now, but looks like we've lost Kyle and Mike both. I think the space is glitching because Mike is saying that he's requesting I couldn't see him. So sorry about that, guys. But no, I agree. And again, I can have an entire space on what just transpired over the last 2 or 3 months. Jen knows, Millie knows. Like we know the difference between the purse holders in the Republican Party that are stepping down and creating all these problems versus the people that are America first, that are actually trying to fight for the stuff that, like as Kyle mentioned, have the stomach to actually chase down this stuff. But right now, infighting is not the answer. And whatever social media infighting is going on, y'all are crazy. Y'all need to chill out. Like this stuff's way more important. So Kyle, are you back with us, or is Mike under that? I don't know.
Hey, this is Kyle here.
Okay, Kyle, because Mike's having trouble too. He said he's requesting, but I don't see him, so I sent him an invite via DM. Sometimes that is kind of like a shortcut to make it work. Let's see. Yeah, so Mike, if you can hear me, go into your DM on X and enter the space through that link. Sometimes when someone's requesting and you can't see them, if you send an invite directly through DM, it'll automatically bring you up as a speaker, and I don't have to see it because it's glitching. Obviously, we're obviously talking about things that people don't want us talking about, right? like, I think that's what's happening here. So, but again, if you guys look in this thread, it's up in the nest, down in the chat. This came out today from Oversight Project, and I've kind of moved on a little bit because we were talking about the outreach for prisoners and people that have come out and creating this groundswell of resources for people to basically buy their vote. I mean, Biden's good at buying votes. We've seen the student loan forgiveness, even though Supreme Court said, nah, bro, we're not doing that. They still doing it anyway. 6.1 billion, I think is what the last time I saw the last one. But then if you get to this one here, the native one, this is interesting because again, this is the theme of this executive order is all touch points of citizens with the US government. This is where the effort needs to be placed. And so if you look at this is from Samantha I told you it worked, Mike. Samantha Kelty, Native American Rights Fund. Now that I've got you up here, Mike, I'll add you about a co-host. Um, Number 9, Samantha Kelty, Native American Rights Fund. No other racial or ethnic group faces the obstacles to voting that Native American voters do. So, yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that, man. I've been knocking on the door a little bit. Glad it finally broke through.
Glitches.
I've been sitting here yelling at my unconnected phone, wanting to make this point for about 10 minutes now, because I should have led with this. It's getting people registered to vote is not necessarily about getting them to vote. Okay, I know that sounds counterintuitive. It's about increasing the universe of potential ballots that are sent
Correct.
out.
Correct.
And this is when I go around and talk to folks about election integrity, I try to break it down like a simple fraction. The left and they want to increase the denominator as big as possible. the universe of collectible ballots that are out there through all, automatically mailing them out, and then make it as easy as possible to collect that number. So oppose anything that makes it harder, whether it's ID, proof of citizenship, long periods, all that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, the Republican Party essentially has a fixed numerator up top of the people that they can actually get to legitimately vote. And so, on its best day, that includes getting a lot of low propensity people to vote through ballot chasing and all that kind of whatever you want to call it. But you is so long as you control the denominator, which the left does, you can always win in the fraction war. And so that's what this is ultimately about: getting as many ballots out there as possible so you can make up whatever difference you need to make up.
I
Yeah.
would
And
say 1000% to that, because in the election trifecta document that these leftist groups were sharing, their number one in the trifecta was the voter rolls. And they wanted to make sure to add new voters and then also to sue to try to fight in the courts to have the voter rolls essentially reinstated that the GOP had sued to have purged. Right? So they need to have those people registered. And then the next part is, obviously they talk about ballots, these mail-in ballots, printing ballots, making ballots. And then the other part is it's even better. That's why they want to target inactive voters, is because you could possibly, get these inactive voters registered and then they'll just forget about it and very unlikely to follow through. But then they're able to kind of recollect those mail in ballots when they go out. And then all I have to do is make sure they make it back to the drop boxes, essentially.
Now,
That,
this was the point, Mike, and I'm gonna come to you on this. This is the point I was trying to make when I was saying that, like, the Native American population, they every aspect of their life, they are contacting the federal government. This is the point I'm making. It wasn't because they were going to go out and vote. It was because that produces a potential ballot, a ballot to be harvested, a ballot to be counted. And that was the entire premise of this. This is why I felt it was so important. That you're right. You probably should have led with this one, because this is a big one, because every aspect of most of their lives involve some kind of access in some way, whether it's healthcare, whether it's benefits, whether it's money, whether it's whatever, they're interacting with the federal government. Therefore, they have more touch points to create a ballot.
100%. And that coincides with a lot of other trends that are happening on Native American reservations right now. I don't know if you guys have noticed this trend, but there's been an increase of like outspoken partisan activity. I think it was Christy Noam, say we'll leave the dog jokes aside. She got banned from a reservation a little bit ago for one thing or another. Huge public statement out there. You're seeing these political activities at like a national political level, like engaging in power politics from Native American tribes. And so you're seeing like a turnover in, like, I guess we'll call them tribal elders and the old school kind of Native American governance structure. And a lot of that, I think, works with the advent of like, the interconnectedness of like actual like social media that these people have been, connected to, for lack of a better term, the lib mind virus, the woke mind virus, the current thing. And there's a generational turnover happening. Also making this a natural Democrat constituency is the one, just like the tragic circumstances that exist on Native American reservations. These are third world places at the end of the day. High levels of alcoholism, drug abuse, sexual crimes, what have you. They're corrupt environments and structures. There's quasi gang related activity, not at the scale we see in other certain areas, but these are a prime place for a we'll call it boss politics and machine politics to occur. And so it's long been envied as kind of, what the traditional inner city African American constituencies have been for the Democrat Party, has been lusted after in the same way by the Democrat machines. And so that's why, and as you know, like when you add the ability of using the built in government service connected tissue to this equation, it becomes a realizable objective. And so we're looking at what to do on this. I think we're going to be spending some time on some reservations in the near future, but I have no doubt I'd be willing to bet anyone in this chat any amount of money we're going to see the highest quote unquote voter turnout rate on reservations that we've ever seen, particularly in Arizona.
Yes, Mike. That's kind of why I brought it up because again, I'm seeing it. I'm actually seeing it at the ground level, meaning I'm not just paying attention to it politically. Uh, I'm going to a gas station or I'm going to a store and I realize this person's native and they live on the reservation, but they come in and work and the attitude towards me just by being a white male is very much akin to the peak of feminist movement, same kind of attitude. And I'm not trying to single them out or say anything. I'm saying that I've noticed a marked change in the interaction. And it is heavy here. And I do have concerns about it because but again, like who has the most probably who has the most oppressor oppressed narrative in this country? Who has that? Well, I would argue the Native Americans do, and that's been something that like you said, many tribal leaders have used to kind of keep them in check over the years to bring in these contracts for casinos and things like that, and not spreading the wealth around the community and kind of keeping it within the council and the tribes. And there is a legitimate argument. I mean, does it rise to the level of an Occupy Wall Street type movement? No, but there is a fervor. There is an oppressed oppressor narrative. This is a goal that Marxists can actually exploit. And then when you add in the weight and power of the federal government at every single touch point, that is a recipe for disaster. I don't know how to handle it. You're right, Mike. I don't. It's probably something I need to start thinking about, looking at this information here and why there was such a focus and actually thinking about it for once, because I typically don't think about it too much. But I think it's a very valid point. Yeah, go ahead, Kyle.
Just want to add another thing too that's in the document here, sort of the advocating for the final length of the race is that they want to make ballot drop boxes are important to have on or near reservations, and they must be advertised and consistent. So in a game of counting and collecting ballots and at such a wide scale, you got to turn them in somewhere. And so the mass mail-in and drop-off ballot harvesting initiatives on these native reservations is also a priority of these groups that were at the meeting.
Yeah, it's it's actually highly concerning. Jen, I saw your hand up earlier too, Jen. Did you want to add something? If you're coming back to your phone.
Yeah, Trash, I was just gonna ask, like, if they're going around to all of these different groups and trying to, convince them that, like, okay, look, we're doing this and this for you, you need to vote for Biden, would it be advantageous for conservative groups to go back around to those same groups and prove to them why Biden isn't the choice and how they're actually working against them and it's all lip service?
Well, I think a play could finally be made, not at a subversive institutional government level, but an actual conversation. Like I think that there's actually something to be talked about there, and I don't think that we're too far. I don't think that we're too far away from being able to actually counter that messaging. Meaning that, like, if America First people on the right actually formulated a message and actually went out and not just necessarily campaigned, because I don't know how that works with tribal lands, but at least messaging saying, hey, you know what? You've been forgotten about for a long time. We do want America to be first. You are Americans. You do live here. Now I understand that you live on tribal land, so it's technically that you're not Americans, but you definitely are. You're on the continental US. And I think that you've been forgotten about for too long. Maybe there is a play there. I don't know what that looks like. I haven't even evaluated this. Like this is really the first time that I'm actually like seriously like looking at it and seeing why number one that they had such a focus on it, and the focus makes sense. Like this makes sense why you would focus on this, and there is a stern oppressor narrative that you can put here, and
Well,
and yeah.
here's the thing I think's kind of really interesting here. Isn't it with Native American lands? It falls under a different jurisdiction, like as far as like law enforcement goes.
They
So
have their own independent tribal police, right? So
right, so
technically, they have their own, I guess, set of police that is under their jurisdiction.
right, so interesting that they want to have these drop boxes on Native American reservations when, I guess that could open up for nefarious activities within a different jurisdiction, like how would we monitor whether those boxes are being secure or what's going on there? To me that just sounds pretty suspicious.
Millie, that is a great question that I'm going to begin looking into right now. And let me put a little black pill on this too. But we'll get to a white pill in a second. Do you know that only a handful of states, and I think like it's two or three, have full-time election integrity prosecutors or prosecutors that for a living full-time look into election crimes or fraud? Only Texas, and I think there's another one. Every other state basically has it's the U.S. attorneys and their offices, and then the state level offices just at the moment of the election are supposed to look into it, but they have zero experience and they haven't been looking into this thing over the course of the last, 3 years, 10 months or whatever. So it's not like that activity is occurring outside the reservations at any bit of scale. But that point that there might not even be a potential for any sort of investigatory or prosecutorial investigation or activity inside reservations is a huge issue. Like I, that's something to focus on, and I think we need to look into.
No, I
Yeah,
agree.
no, I because I'm
Go ahead.
hearing I've heard about organized crime utilizing reservations for certain things because it's outside of jurisdiction. But it is an interesting concept, like having a United States drop box for a federal election in a Native American reservation. How do you make sure that that is actually secure if somebody did decide to go on the reservation, or maybe if somebody was employed that lives on the reservation to start stuffing ballots on a big scale? What jurisdiction would that fall under? Who would
Well,
investigate? Would it be up to the Native American tribal police, or would it be where would that fall under?
I
That's very
mean,
interesting.
It would be a federal entity. So there was a Supreme Court case in 2020 that basically kicked state law enforcement off of native lands for law enforcement purposes. And so it's the federal entity, whether it be tribal police or FBI or whatever alphabet soup in the Justice Department.
I mean,
And we all know
So
how good
nothing.
they are at their jobs.
although this wasn't like a documentary, right? But if you look at Yellowstone and the way politics and the police and everything operate within the native community, I think like kind of highlights the large scale, there could be a lot of abuse there, just when you look at the different issues that came up in that television series.
No, I think that's a great point. And again, when we're talking about like how the tribes operate within the reservation themselves and how they do the politics and negotiate politics not only with law enforcement, but in that show specifically the livestock enforcement, but also the like how casinos operate. I've never really considered thinking about this until I'm reading that they are, and now that I'm thinking about it, that seems to be a massive hole. And Christian, I know you're here with me in Arizona, and you requested when we got on this topic. So, and I know you're involved with local politics. Go ahead, Christian.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate the mic. So about maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, I had a phone call with the state speaker of the House in Arizona, Ben Toma, and the subject of the tribal nations came up. And basically, what I was telling him at the time was simply this: that because the tribal nations not only get federal funds from the federal government, they get state funds. They get money out of the state annual budget in Arizona. So there are many different ways that we can make sure that the tribal nations are willing participants in either having a secure border or making sure that there are not things going on that should not be happening on the tribal land, such as allowing ballot harvesting when the tribal nations clearly intersect in the state of Arizona. But ballot harvesting is illegal in Arizona. Um, And so, really, this just boils down to who is making the decisions when it comes to the money, the budget. That's really the failure point. And until we have people that are in office that will draft up these bills that the way that they need to be drafted up so that the tribal nations are not allowed to do what they've been doing, which is have an open border, and on top of that, do what they're doing with all the left wing advocacy groups. Only then will we really have um, tribal nations that are being willing participants to keep our Republican form of government the way it's intended to be. And we're funding these nations because while they are, essentially keep their own land, and they are under the auspice of the federal government, um, still, these folks are supposed to be maintaining not only our constitutional rights, they're also supposed to be ensuring that we don't have things happen that would cause a stolen election inside the states. That's a big problem, and we do control this. But as I say, we have to have the correct people in office that ensure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Thank you
And
for
just to
that.
throw
Um,
fuel on the fire here, there were I talked about the Supreme Court cases, McGirt versus Oklahoma, basically said that state law enforcement cannot go and round up criminals on Indian reservations where they commit crimes. That was limited by another case, but President Biden appointed a judge in Oklahoma who basically supported that decision because when she was the general counsel for one of the Indian tribes out there, she basically refused to enforce Oklahoma's abortion policy within the state on tribal lands. And she was asked about this at her confirmation hearing, and I think Senator Lee asked a really good series of questions against her to her, but she still had the support of Senator Langford and other folks in the Senate and got put through. But the lack of sort of oversight on tribal lands is a newer phenomenon that I think will play out in this election cycle as well.
Let me drop a little finer point on that. Yes, Senator Langford not only supported this radical activist for a judgeship in Oklahoma, but when we dropped video footage of her saying all those things that Kyle just said, Senator Langford and his team were very, very unhappy with us, and for calling attention to it. They wanted to just sweep it under the rug. Some deal was obviously cut. This is how DC works.
wow, yeah, it's crazy. Well, now I saw Dale. I saw your hand shoot up, and you requested when we started talking about the Native American reservations, and I know you're probably somewhat familiar with that because your daughter is half Native American, and she's up here as well. Any insight you can give us onto like where that would fall if there's ballot boxes on Native American reservations?
Yeah, like it would be probably under federal jurisdiction to do that. But what they're actually trying to create is this jurisdictional quagmire. And in Canada, United States, the Indian reserves are run in a very similar manner. And the protections that they're given are to allow the protection for the corruption they put there. Native reserves across North America are extremely corrupt, and a lot of criminal activity goes on there. So when I look at them putting drop boxes on Indian reserves, all I see is a control systems nightmare, and where you're going to have a lot of corruption going on. And I think that one of the things that really need to be done is that the correct messaging needs to come to the Indians, because the current regime that they're supporting are the ones that are just like, I mean, using them as guinea pigs in experiments and a lot of things that are going on, like, that are terrible. And so they need to be more informed, and that they need to have the right as Christian said, the right type of leadership to make sure that things go right, because that should never take place. That's a nightmare waiting to happen. It's got to stop.
I just didn't anticipate. That being an attack vector, and the thing is that it has occurred to me. I lived in the Midwest. I lived in Missouri for a little while. I lived in Kansas. I was born in Kansas. Lived in the Midwest for a little while. Lived in Ohio, and I've always been around, tribes and Native Americans. And Ohio is fascinating. The burial mounds are just absolutely crazy, and I've always attached a kind of like historic, I don't know, a historic meaning to it. And two things, and I'm actually gonna give a personal opinion for a moment. This is not the opinion of anybody in the space, only my own. In that, I'm actually offended that they would do this, considering the historical context. But again, it's all about numbers. It's all about ballots. It's all about winning. But these are people that are actually suffering, probably I would say the most per capita in this country. We see the drug abuse, we see the alcoholism, we see the living conditions, and we see this weird amalgamation, this weird lawful construct of how native tribes operate on their own land and reservations versus the rest of the country and in the federal government. And it's always bothered me. But this really stuck out to me, to the fact of we're really going to do this. Is this really what you're going to do? You're going to essentially apply the oppressor narrative, this Marxist takeover of institutions with Native Americans. Like, this is what you're going to do. And I do have concerns about this. Matter of fact, I think this is a very vulnerable portion of a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here. When Mike said I should have led with that, it didn't really even sink in until I really thought about it over this space. And number one, I'm offended. It doesn't really matter whether I'm offended or not. I don't care about my feelings, but I'm offended. And number two, this is actually something that I think we can probably fix. I don't think that there's any politicians out there that had an appetite to actually fix this broken system of what this means, and this fake persona that they have some kind of sovereignty within this country, when it's been reduced to these specific areas that are barren and not productive at all, and not being able to actually be able to climb and exist as the same way that an American citizen can exist, even though it's really bad right now. I'm actually kind of offended, Dale. I got to be honest with you. Not to bring my personal matters into this, because I just never really I never really thought about it in this respect. But to Mike's point earlier, they are piecing together a coalition that makes zero sense on its face, yet makes complete sense in the logistics and the pure numbers game. Like, this is actually a problem. And thank you, Mike and Kyle and everyone at Oversight. Thank you for sharing this. This is actually very, very serious. But in this context, I think it's a percentage of it. But I think it's overall serious if we care about people and American citizens, which I believe they should be. Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
That's why we use the term predatory as we talk about these things. These are predatory activities. I mean, uh, it is a sad state of affairs in a constitutional republic when the role of a political party that spends, 100, how many, I don't even know how much money is going to be spent this election. I'm sure it'll be way more than the last one, but not money on making people's lives better, but just on, a couple of month period around election time, just to make sure they can harvest the ballot that they may or may not fill out. That's like what our form of government has come down to. Power politics of just flooding the zone with collectible ballots, with no improvements for anybody's life. That's the real tragedy of this. I think, I'm offended too, and no one should care that I'm offended, and I'm with you on that. But like, we should be pissed. We should be pissed. The government's meant to serve us, and it's certainly not doing that. And I mean, that's obviously not true, even on the right to a certain extent. But clearly on the left, it is so predatory and subversive in nature, and that's why when we hear these terms that are thrown around like defending democracy, we're just in the upside down world. And that's why, like, you getting the message out on this stuff and everyone here talking about it, I think is so important, because this is the white pill. Is like the facts are on our side, the truth is on our side, and right is on our side. And I think there's enough people across this country to realize how much bullshit this is all wrapped up in.
It really is, and it speaks to the desperation. So that is the white pill. The white pill is, all right. You know what? We're going to address all people. We are actually going to try to be the tide that lifts all ships. And listen, I have my complaints on the right. I'm not going to get into tribal retail politics because honestly, retail politics just makes my brain hurt. Like it's just so reactionary and emotional. I'm not interested in it. I'm interested in actually the skeleton, the framework, what's being built out, what's being done, and we have reduced ourselves to politics in this country and who can collect more ballots and who can collect them quicker and who can we exploit to get those ballots. Are you kidding me? Like that's not what our values are. Millie, I saw you on mute. Go ahead and I'll go to Dale.
Yeah, I'm just really interested now on how the elections work on American reservations. Like, I've never even
Me
thought about
too.
that and how that
Me
might
too.
differ. So I don't know. I'm curious to hear from Dale or Keisha. I know Keisha is an American that is Native American, so I don't know if she's voted and maybe can kind of give us a little bit of insight of the way that happens. But go ahead, Dale.
Yeah, if people actually examined what they did with the Native American reserves and the laws, you'd be very appalled at what was actually being done. Because Canada and the United States, they operate in very, very, very similar ways. And in Canada, you have a lot of remote Native American or Native reserves where you have to fly in and out. And they have some in the States, and they're very segregated. So you have a perfect opportunity to go out and test out certain situations without these people coming in to contact with most of the general public. This is how they got to perfect a lot of corruption. And an election in the native reserve is going to go whatever way whoever has the money is going to go. Like whoever pays them, that's who wins the election, and that's just the way it goes. They have a very uneducated or very suppressed population by the ruling class in Indian reserves, and this is the way it is across the board, wherever I've seen, and it is absolutely disgusting, and it needs to change. And most people are completely unaware of this because they basically keep them off to their own side. And like when I was in the United States, I saw even less natives in the United States walking around than I would in Canada. And so you see that they have the perfect opportunity to do wide scale cheating and whatever the hell they want at those points in time. So that's really where that's at. I'll land that there and I'll let my daughter speak.
Dale, I appreciate it. Keisha, I'm going to come to you. And again, I like to say this very much. Uh, Not pulling your chains, Mike, Kyle, and Oversight Project. Thank you for this. This is actually something that was a complete blindside. I knew this, I understood this, but I did not, I did not really in the forefront of all the politics and all the things that I'm fighting for that I would like to change in this country and that I would like to defeat this institutionalized Biden administration voting fraud ballot harvesting operation that has been completely industrialized. We're talking about it again. And just them going after this actually makes us talk about it. And we should talk about it. And so I'm here for it. Keisha, I saw your hand come up. And I'm telling you, like, this is a really powerful moment. I'm not kidding. Because, like, I understood this. I grew up around tribes. I understood the politics. I understood how it worked. But I never thought that it would ever be exploited to this degree. And they're doing it. They're going for it. They're actually going for it. That's a white pill in itself, but I'll get to that later. Keisha, go ahead. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Trash Discourse, for letting me up to speak, and Millie, appreciate it. Yeah, I agree with what my dad said there about, what's going on in the tribal lands. And, I am a Native American or American Indian, I guess the legal term here in the United States. And there is really there's no really, structure, or I mean there's structure, but there is a lot of lawlessness going on in the tribal lands, especially when it comes to politics and the voting and things like that. I remember at one point, a couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago, the tribal leaders, some of them were starting to threaten the government, saying if they didn't meet certain demands, that they would start letting people in through the southern border, but on the native lands, so that they couldn't say anything or do anything about it as a government, because they would end up just becoming uh, citizens through the tribal lands. And I know that they do that quite often. They have those laws that they can pretty much do whatever they want in that regard without any hindrance. I know the chiefs, the band councils and everything, they run everything, and there's not really much uh, good leadership, like my father said, for the actual Native Americans who are suffering from the effects of what's going on within the tribe, and they're not really getting the help and support that they need. And like I've lived in Canada and the United States. Obviously, I was born in Canada, and you see natives everywhere in Canada. It's very easy for the general population to see what's going on with them and to interact with them. But since I've moved to the U.S., I don't see them anywhere. And I'm actually native. Like I don't. I've only seen a handful of natives, and they were also mixed like me. Um, I think that segregation is because, well, the discrimination, they're trying to keep everybody segregated so that they can continue to get away with this stuff. Because the less that people actually know about what's going on in the reserves and the less they care about it, the more they're going to be able to infiltrate everybody else's system, like what they're doing with the voting system and everything else. They'll continue to use it for their own agenda. And a lot of the natives don't understand, like the ones that vote primarily Democrat, which is, a big portion, don't actually know that those are the very, people, well, the woke Democrats at least are the ones that are doing some of the harm that they're experiencing. So there's a whole boatload of corruption and things going sideways there. And the tribal lands, I'm not surprised at anything that you guys have said, because I mean, I don't know, just growing up native or whatever, it makes sense because of how fluid their laws are, how easy it would be for them to consistently use the tribal lands. And they're doing it even with the trafficking with kids. A lot of, I spoke to Kathleen Wynne in Arizona, running for Congress, and she mentioned how numerous children are being trafficked through the tribal lands because the regular police and everyone else can't go in there or do anything about it. So they send them across the southern border and everything like that. So there definitely needs to be something done about everything that we've mentioned.
Yeah, no, in Keisha, that's a great point. So I'm in Arizona. Uh, my buddy has a family house in uh, Puerto Penasco in Mexico. It's a little beach town in the California Bay, and it's about a 4 hour drive from here in Scottsdale, 4.5 hours to the beach in Mexico. So we used to go down there 2 3 times a year, and we would cross at a border crossing called Lukeville, and it was. It was whatever. I mean, you show your passport, you get searched a little bit, whatever, and you go through. It's another 45 minutes till you get to California Bay. Well, they shut Lukeville down 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, give or take, and they were funneling a lot of these illegal aliens through NGOs into Oregon Pipe National Forest. Oregon Pipe National Forest is nothing more than a bunch of cacti, a bunch of cactus, but they're really cool looking cactus. But Ben Berkwam had actually exposed like these camps where they would actually receive these people through that border. I went down September 2023, the last time before they closed the border completely. It's back open now, but there were thousands and thousands of African migrants, some South American, mostly African, at that border. And I knew what time it was. We've been talking about all the NGOs. However, I was talking to a couple of CBP people down there when I was down there that I know because I'm friends with some of the CBP because I cover the border sometimes. And they were telling me, they're like, yeah, yeah, no, no, they're not crossing here. No, no, like most of the kids and most of the trafficking is done on the Indian res about 20 miles to the west of this Lukeville border checkpoint. And we can't go in there, we can't do anything. And that's where they were filtering them through, coming up to Sky Harbor Airport, then being flying across around the world. Ashley St. Clair, Newmont's Bro, many other people have reported on this. I was talking with them when they were doing it. They sent me pictures while they were in the airport, while they were here, because I met up with them when they were here. And essentially, what they're doing is they've moved the trafficking, especially the children, but I'm not going to get into that. But the trafficking operation, not just like the migrant NGO Catholic charity migration that was going through Lukeville, they've moved most of that into the native lands that are about 20, 25 miles west of Lukeville here in Arizona. And then that's when they were moving them through. I, again, I know that. I was thinking about it. We were talking about it. I know that many people, like even Oversight and Heritage, have been exposing the flyers and how the cartels were working. But to really understand how cartels are actually working with tribal leaders and councils is a very different matter. Matter of fact, Muckraker just joined us on stage between Oversight and Muckraker, breaking this huge story on the flyers of how this works. And Muckraker could probably add some context to this conversation. I'm glad you joined us. It was a great story you guys broke, by the way. Holy cow. But again, this is, and so it's not just like some of the stuff that we track down with like trafficking and illegal immigration. They're now putting the ballot harvesting operation through the tribes because it's another example, as what Keisha had pointed out, that the laws are murky, that law enforcement can't operate within those lands because it's not technically on the continental United States, because they have their own sovereignty technically under the laws that we have. And this creates a very bad problem. So, Keisha, you got your hand up, and I'd like to go to Muckraker because they actually agreed to join. So, Keisha, go ahead, and then Muckraker, thanks for joining us, and great reporting, by the way.
Yes, so I'll just briefly say quickly I how I mentioned about the segregation and how they're using the discrimination of people to keep the natives segregated. The immigrants that come through the border, whether they come through the tribal lands or not, I noticed when I was unlawfully detained by ICE, when I, fled here to the United States, these immigrants that came across were telling me more about Native American law than even the the American citizens within the country. They get coached before they come into the country on how to use Native American laws to their benefit, with the elections, with citizenship, with protection against law enforcement or whatever if they want to commit crimes. And these people were explaining this to me for the 7 months that I was, in the detention with them. And I was shocked because growing up, even within the United or in Canada and then coming to the US, most people don't know squat about Native Americans. So like I said, um, the average citizen of America does need to take an interest in what's going on within the tribal lands, understand the laws and how murky they are and how they're affecting absolutely everybody, so that we can come to a better understanding and put that kind of discrimination that we have aside, so that we can have a clearer picture of what's actually going on, or else it's going to continue and it's going to get very bad very quickly. Because like I said, these immigrants get coached. They know exactly what they're doing when they come in, and they know exactly how to get it. And it is a very dangerous situation. I'll tell you that right now.
Interesting. This is really an interesting thing that Millie did. I and Mike, everybody, Kyle, everybody up here. I did not foresee this actually being something that we should probably be considering. I didn't even think about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. Like, if what Keisha's saying is true, that it's very easy for the illegal immigrants to get some kind of citizenship on the reservations, theoretically, they could funnel immigrants onto reservations, make a deal with these
Yeah.
chiefs or tribal leaders to get them all citizenship, to then get them to vote, and then they've got their drop boxes ready to go.
So I did not. Man, I did not even. I didn't see this coming. And again, I was going through this reporting. I thought it was great reporting based on the other things that we cover. I had no idea I was walking into this. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, wait a minute. Like all this checks out, the border, everything else. Muckraker, great reporting on the flyers and everything else. Go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, just on the discussion about these different reservations, I was there and, I was one of these people that, yeah, I knew that they had their own kind of laws and their own jurisdiction, but I wasn't aware of how serious it was. And, we drove down through the Tanojo Reservation here in Arizona, up to the border. And I mean, you would be shocked for people who have never seen what the border looks like in that area. It's non-existent. Right. It's basically just for show. I mean, I have it on video, just walking back and forth across the border, and there's empty beer cans. It looks like people are just hanging out around there. I don't know who would be hanging around there. That's also suspect. But, then the other thing is there's zero oversight. I was there and I was filming this, and then I have a Border Patrol agent come up to me, and the guy threatens to call tribal police, and he's like trailing me out of the spot. And so I'm driving away. and they have these that. Well, I saw a suspect. Looks like almost like a detainment area, and yeah, I tried droning it. And then this guy turns on his lights, comes up to me, and starts threatening me that he's going to call the tribal police on me. And so my point in saying all this is, obviously none of this is like breaking news, but the point is there's zero oversight. And so to the extent you have some sort of trafficking operations, smuggling operations of people or contraband or whatever else, or fraudulent activities in the election. I mean, good luck having journalists or citizen reporters going in there and doing anything about it, because they'll just threaten you with the tribal police and haul your ass away. So it's extremely concerning.
No, it's highly concerning. And again, like I was talking about the tribal lands and tribal police and how they have like their own individual sovereignty in this country that are not executable by federal law or state law and whatever it may be. But then it's that corrupt where they would run basically all these different corrupt activities, whether it be trafficking, whether it be the border, whether it be drugs, whatever it may be, and they're actually protecting it with the tribal police. Like there's a stretch. So I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. So there's a stretch between Tempe and when you get to Scottsdale, and it goes through the Pima Reservation, right? And it's off to the right. But when I'm speeding through there, because I speed, I got to be honest with you, I speed. Like, listen, we go 80, 85 on 101. That's what we do. That's what we do. My only concern is not Scottsdale PD or Highway Patrol. It's Pima and the tribal police. Because if you pull off those exits, there's like 4 exits, 5 exits. If you pull off and go to the right, you will be pulled over by the tribal police, and they make your life hell. So it's a weird dynamic. And on the flip side of that, they also can control not only the border flow, not only trafficking and flow, not only but vote ballot harvesting operations, essentially. Basically anything that would be extra constitutional or outside of the scope of a federal government or a state government, these tribal authorities have the ability to oversee. At the same time, these people are also not they're not what am I trying to say? They're not accountable to essentially the same system that we operate under. And if they are moving into these get out the vote ballot harvesting operations that don't fall under the purview of state law or even federal law, that's a serious problem. Like that is actually a serious problem. Muckraker, go ahead. Yeah, I saw your hand go up, and I'll go to Dale and Keisha.
Well, I think that this might be maybe more of something that Keisha could touch upon. It sounds like that she's actually very well acquainted with the situation on these reservations. But this is more of a question. What overseeing bodies are there on these reservations to make sure that we don't have some sort of massive fraud going on at these drop boxes throughout the reservation? Wherever they may be. I mean, like, I don't really know. I don't have an answer to that. But certainly, it can't be a guy like me, because they might just haul me to some tribal prison. Right. So I'm not too sure. So that's my question that I'm posing to Keisha and Dale, if they have an answer.
I
Yeah,
agree. That's my question.
there is no oversight, right? Like, I mean, this is why the reserves are set up the way they are. They are completely controlled by like the chiefs and the council, and I would dare say that there's a lot of cartel control in those councils. They're bought and paid for pretty much virtually everywhere. A lot of the wealth is held on by the chief and the councils, or however they have it structured, and most of the people live in squalid circumstances. But they're very loyal, and they're brainwashed, and because of that sort of rift and separation, they have distrust to the people that aren't their own people, because they've been isolated and so forth. And like Millie was saying, they can bring people in. They can also get people out across that same border. Like, the lawlessness in reserves is completely rampant, and there is zero control. A lot of these guys are living in fear, but they have nowhere to turn to, because there's, like I said, a jurisdictional quagmire, and no feds are not going to do anything because the status quo benefits them, especially in this current administration, right?
Well, and yeah, no, and Keisha, I'm going to come to you, but that touches on exactly what oversight Mike and Kyle and everybody have exposed, where every single touch point of the federal government many of these people that live in these communities depend upon touching the federal government for their survival, whether it's healthcare, whether it's money, whatever it may be. And if they have a quote unquote get out the vote initiative that comes down from the chief executive of the country and DOJ is reinforcing it, then using the systems of government to basically implement these initiatives and then create these ballot boxes. And every time that they have to touch the federal government for their supplies, money, food, whatever, that they're being inundated with these politics, then thus they have to cast a ballot because it's just another ballot. You know what? Give me your ballot. I'll tell you what. Give me your ballot. We'll take care of it for you. By the way, here's your monthly stipend, whatever it may be. Kyle, I saw you on mute, but I think this comes to the heart of the matter here.
Right, right. If you look at the actual document, we didn't tweet this out in our tweet thread, but the NGOs are sort of hitting on your point about people that have many touches with the federal government would be ideal uh, voters to register because they're probably likely to vote Democrat. And so, on page 4 and 5 of the document that we published today, the representative from the League of Women Voters encouraged all agencies that provide public assistance to have an opt-out system instead of opt-in system for automatically registering voters that receive any service from the government. And so it's targeting, um, you know, people that rely on the government for basic services, that whether it be, welfare benefits, housing benefits. HUD is all over this document too, as another touch point for potential voter registration, to automatically register those people. If you're getting benefits, the government knows where you live, so you could get those benefits, and they can also send you a ballot and harvest those ballots down the line.
Yeah, that's the story. I mean, Millie. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, we're chasing down all these, Democrat operative groups. We're chasing them down, and like, there's concern there, and we need to be chasing it down. But like, how I need to look at the numbers. I actually need to look at the numbers a little bit because I think you're right. At any point, whatever you touch the federal government for, this EO basically covers the access and funding and fundraising capabilities to for groups to bolster their support in those specific areas. That's actually a serious problem, and that is a serious blind spot. Kudos to you guys for finding this, because like, holy shit, that is a very, very gaping hole. Keisha, let me come to you next, because I promised I'd come to you. Thanks, Kyle, for that. And then Dale, I'll come back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify about how illegals could obtain certain kind of status and protection if they came through the tribe. So, when people come to the United States and they want to get citizenship, even if they marry someone or have a child, we see all the time parents are still deported back to their countries, and the child is left here or the whole family's deported back, regardless. And it can take up to 20 years sometimes for people, or 15 years to get citizenship. If someone makes their way through the tribe lands, illegals, and they find someone to have a child with, that's instant citizenship. Like, the child, because the child would become a tribal citizen instantly, the parent would also, and there would never be any opportunity to deport that child or that adult ever, because they are now sovereign more than Americans by law. If they marry an American Indian, they are now sovereign by law, and they can never be deported ever. Um, so, that's kind of the way that system is being used with the illegals. And the thing about a lot of people that come across Central and South America into the native lands, a lot of Native Americans are pretty ambiguous. They end up sending them to many different countries because how easy it is for them to blend in. And it's kind of the same when they come through the tribal lands. A lot of Hispanic people do actually look native because, historically they were. So it makes the issue a lot harder to actually deal with. You can actually almost sometimes not even tell the difference. There were some natives in the detention with me um, uh, for those months, and you couldn't tell that they were actually Hispanic from a Hispanic country because they looked like any other native in a tribe. You literally cannot tell the difference. So there's a lot of issues that way. And that's something that really needs to be considered and looked at. And like I said, they're being coached into knowing how to do this and utilize this for their own protection and to actually genuinely violate American laws. And it's not funny, but yeah, it's just something that we really need to pay more attention to.
Interesting. Millie, I'm going to go to Dale here, but before I go, we're probably going to wind down the space here shortly. But guys, follow this explosive reporting. It's down in the chat. It's up in the nest. I think that my takeaway from this is a very different takeaway than I anticipated going into it. And what I mean by that is that I'm going to be looking at how the structure that they've set up. So a lot of the groups that Millie, thankfully for her, she's been able to expose through her investigative reporting that we've been paying attention to. I think that we need to keep an eye on them, but I also think that we need to keep an eye on something that I don't think many of us were paying attention to. And I'm looking at this, and I'm trying by asking questions of some very smart people on the panel here, trying to paint a picture and understand why this was such a priority for this initiative, which is Executive Order 14019 by Joe Biden in July of 2021, and what these FOIA documents are actually showing, and what Oversight Project has been able to uncover, but what that means moving forward. And I think that there's a little sleight of hand here going on. And why was it so important to focus on the native lands? And I think they've overplayed their hand here. Like, we've looked at the native land, we've looked at the native part of immigration or illegal aliens. I had not considered this in the voting calculus at all, and I'm actually highly concerned coming away from the space. That's my takeaway. It's something I'm actually probably going to be paying attention to, specifically because I'm in Arizona and we have our own problems. But this is this is something that I think is a gaping hole in anybody's policy. But these people seem to be exploiting it. So Millie, before I go to Dale, like, do you have any takeaway from this? And I kind of want to get some final thoughts from everybody on the space before we wind down, because I know it's getting late on the East Coast. It's like 11 o'clock. Um, but what do you take away from this? Or let me go around the panel and then Dale, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that after hearing that they're wanting to put drop boxes on Native American tribal lands, I'm definitely concerned about it. And especially knowing the level of ballot operations that these get out the vote NGOs have engaged in the recent past elections, I'm very, very concerned about it. But I'm also concerned about this executive order undermining states' rights as well in elections, because the more you have a president trying to federalize election laws across the board, it's undermining the state's individual rights to essentially decide their own election laws to a certain degree. Like, if you're just mandating that, and that's what I think that the Democrats are also trying to accomplish with the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act that they're trying to get passed. If that passes, that's really going to help the Democrats engage in nefarious activities in the 2024 election, because there's so much in there, like, that they've included, which is interesting because some of the things that is in this executive order is also in the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which they're trying to, like, force on all the states federally through this. So I do wonder, how enforceable is this executive order? I mean, obviously something passed by Congress, I think, is going to have more teeth. It is interesting to me that, they have some things in this executive order that they also have in this John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. But there are things that they don't have so far, which I don't know, maybe they do. But in the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, one of the things that they're trying to do is make it so that you can essentially register to vote and have your address be a PO box, which would open up for a lot of um, voter fraud and other things to happen. But some of the things I noticed with this executive order that are kind of overlapping there, I do wonder how enforceable. I guess that's my question to Mike. Like, how enforceable is this executive order?
So states have a role to play. The ship has sailed from a federal legislative perspective. There's some ongoing litigation of varying, I think, likelihood of success. We are exploring other federal legal theories, but our next play, I'll give everyone in this chat a preview, is taking a new bombshell that we'll be dropping, a lot more than what's in this memo, and encouraging the states, because the states have a right under the NVRA, which is the National Voter Registration Act, to basically determine who gets to do this type of activity in their states. And so that's the play we'll be making next. Encouraging states to flex their muscles while simultaneously exploring federal theories in litigation to stop this activity. We got a lot more coming on this. I will just say it's like a final ending point. What we're seeing now is something that even in the Obama administration, they would never have had the gumption to do. There's a certain combination occurring right now of just shamelessness and power, and then also desperation and just the complete abandonment of principles and morality, and ends justify the means. Anything to stop President Trump is the operating theory. And you've seen a turnover in the power brokers on the left where really radical people like, Susan Rice and Eric Holder was a lot more radical than people give him credit for. And Obama on the outside doing all the things he felt like he couldn't get done on the inside. They're not leaving any stone unturned. And this executive order is one of the biggest ways they're doing it, but there are also others. And I think illegal aliens are a huge part of it too.
No, I agree. And I think there's some virtue signaling, Mike, going on right now within Congress about this removing from the census. I think Trump was all over it. I think he understood it. And I think he understood redrawing of congressional maps. But I think it goes much further than that. And I don't think that we need to be reacting on that level.
Right. There's a reason why Mike Johnson, after he funded all of this activity we've talked about tonight, got on the first plane down to Mar-a-Lago to introduce a messaging bill that was clearly going nowhere unless it was attached to must-pass legislation to kind of give political cover on it. But the sad reality is this current Republican Congress and the counterparts in the Senate, they fundamentally don't care about this stuff. They're already there. They're incumbents. Most of them are largely safe. These things get in the way of funding Ukraine and others, and so they're not. They'll write a letter or two about it, virtue signal on it, but they're not fighting the same fight we are. Not even close.
No, not even close. But again, this fight is important. I still think that developing networks and presenting this information, I still think it's very, very important. And this is why it's very important to me. I mean, I've had some revelations on the space that I did not anticipate going into it. But when I looked at it and considered it more thoroughly, it was, well, there's something there. So yeah, they're not having the same fight. And that's kind of speaking to some of the frustrations, I believe, but was by the name of a person named Kimmy that came on the space. Like, listen, this is not a parallel fight. This is something very different. But I think that this. I'm glad that I'm not alone on an island. That I think a lot of people are having this fight. So let me go through the speaker panel here. Muckraker, Kyle, do you guys want to offer any final words here before we close it down?
Hey, thank you for hosting this. I think this is, I think we said a couple of times throughout the space tonight that raising awareness is one of the key pillars of this, and I think doing this space helps do that. Mike did preview sort of what we're doing here. We're also got more to come at the state level to see how far this is going throughout the country as well. But thanks again for having us for putting this together.
Dude, thank you so much, man. This is a big deal. Like, listen, Millie, like I'm gonna send for Millie for a second. She's been shouting on a microphone with nobody listening and being censored and suppressed and banned, talking about a lot of the things that we are facing in 2024, and that I've been talking about the last 2 or 3 years on my what was like my seventh account now being banned, I guess. Um, for talking about these very things. This is very important stuff. Like, yes, this is in the weeds for people that just want their political hot takes so they can go on and feel like they're informed. But this is the meat on the bones. People are always asking, what are we going to do about it? What are the meat on the bones? Like, what can we talk about? what is it that's actually going on? Well, it's this. It's all of this. Like this is actually what it is. And if we want to change the momentum to actually be able to fight back and push back and expose this stuff and actually talk about it, and then on top of it, not just talk about it or build a platform on it, but affect real change. I think the focus on the state level, the local level, is very, very important. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Dale, I promise I'm coming to you to land our plane here. But Muckraker, did you want to add anything? Because great reporting again on the flyer. If you guys aren't following anybody on this panel, please follow them. A lot of information. I know this is probably a fire hose for people that may not have been aware of this stuff. But just follow these people because all of these people are putting out the stuff that actually matters, not some hot take on MSNBC.
Yeah, well, not much to say on my end. I appreciate you hosting the space. Thanks for letting me speak. And yeah, there's a lot more coming from Muckraker and the Heritage Oversight Project. So just stay tuned.
I'm here for it. I'm so here for it. Yeah, Dale, go ahead.
All right. Yeah, I'll also say thanks for letting me speak, and good to see you too, Millie. You got a lot of good stuff, really coordinated with what I was doing. One thing I will say with Arizona, and I noticed this when I was looking at the executive orders for COVID, and this is something that plays in with the Indian reserves because a lot of them are pushing for this UNDRIP, which is just to steal sovereignty and so forth. Most of the states all of the states that I looked at were directed by the CDC to initiate the COVID response, but Arizona was very different. They took their marching orders from the WHO, and then the CDC was incorporated in a lot later in the executive order, which tells me that they're doing something very different in Arizona. And when you look at what's going on there, they're implementing a lot of the WHO or the UN goals through Arizona. And it's a gateway. Like, I mean, with the illegals flooding in, the voting and the corruption that's going on there, you're looking at a completely different agenda that is going on in Arizona outside of the American agenda. And so this is something that needs to be restrained at a state level because of the way the United States is constructed, that the states have more power and the ability to get rid of the federal encroachment because of the way that it's designed. So the states are the ones that have to solve this. The federal government has its place, but to fix the corruption in the states, that has to be done at a state level, and people really need to start exercising their rights and getting their hands dirty, so to speak. Yeah, there's the people that want to just be the passengers, and that's fine for them. But you got to think you only need the 1% to even start it. At the end of the Revolutionary War, it was only the 3%, right? And so the people that know what needs to be done, they need to start getting into it because Arizona is going to be a very key state going forward, and there's a lot of corruption, and the Indian reserves are a large portion of that corruption. If that is not clamped, you will never have a secure border. You'll never have like secure elections or anything. There's too much corruption there, and that needs to be put down like real quick. Before
Yeah,
2024, there's nothing left.
yeah. I think that a collection of evidence and things that we've talked about tonight indicate that is very much a soft spot that I got to be honest with you. Entering into the space, I did not know existed. So that's definitely something that needs to be focused on. And again, thank you guys for listening to the space. I appreciate you. Follow everybody up here. To be clear, this is just the start of a lot of information coming out and a lot of other things going on. So like, stay tuned, stay forth. But before I close out, and again, thank you guys on the East Coast. It's almost 11:30. You guys are rock stars for rocking with us. Millie, did you want to have anything else you wanted to say before we close out? Wait, guys, go to at Sleuth Army, SESLEUTH Army. We're going to be posting a lot of original stories on that account. We're just creating it. We're just getting started. And I appreciate you guys being here. But Millie, do you have anything else you want to add, Mike? Anybody before we close this out? And thank you guys for rocking with us tonight.
I'm good. Thanks for having us, bro.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you to the Oversight Project for doing this work and putting this out. And I just want to remind everyone to please share it. share the press release, let everyone know about what's happening. I mean, that's the only way we can kind of overcome the suppression algorithms. Share, share, share. All right, everyone. Thank you for hosting the space, Trash, and thanks Mike, thanks Oversight, Muckraker, Dale, Kasia, Jack, John. Thanks everyone for this amazing space. This has been mind blowing today.
I got to be honest with you. It was a huge release, and I was not prepared for a new paradigm shift that I need to look at going into it. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. Have a good night, guys. Thanks, and I appreciate your support.